Great. So people just need to click the got it on that. So the recording has started. We will be sharing this on our website in the future, hopefully by later this week. We also recorded the presentation we did at 12 o'clock. So there will be two similar but not identical versions of today's presentation. Your audio is muted right now. Again, please keep it that way. We tend to mute the video as well when we're a really large group. When it's a smaller group, it's less important. So if you want to have your fun, that is fine. We are going to use the chat function today for questions, and you may ask questions throughout the presentation, and I'll pause from time to time, ask Jesse if there are any questions and answer them in real time, especially if they're related to the topic that I'm talking about at that moment. And you can download the chats in the chat box by hitting Save Chat. This webinar is accessible. The subtitles are available. To see them, you hit More Show Subtitles. And then the instructions say to contact me, Gwen, with accessibility concerns. And the truth of the matter is I am not competent at doing Zoom very much. And so if you're having trouble with the subtitles, what I'll ask Jesse to do is just turn them on for the whole thing if there's a problem. But you can just drop that in the chat box, just because I am not actually sure how to turn that on. Okay, a couple of things I want to say before I launch into the actual presentation. So this presentation is on, it's on sort of lessons learned as Medicaid renewals have begun and progressed starting last spring through today. This is not a webinar on Medicaid eligibility and what you need to do to get eligible under different Medicaid programs. We do have a recorded webinar on that. It is a bit old. It's on our website. So the numbers are outdated, though many of the concepts are correct. But that webinar is being re-recorded in February as soon as we have the 2024 numbers. And once that's recorded, it will be up on our website. So if what you really are interested in now or in the future is about the different possible programs one can be eligible for under the Medicaid umbrella, that presentation is there now. Numbers are dated. A new presentation will be up by the end of February. So with that background, I will launch in. So most of you probably know that during the public health emergency starting in March of 2020, there was what was called a moratorium on Medicaid terminations. This meant that a person who was on Medicaid could not be terminated for Medicaid except in very specific limited situations, like they moved out of state. That public health emergency ended on May 11th. And shortly before it ended, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, detangled the Medicaid renewal and moratorium from the public health emergency effective April 1st. And they told states, and New Jersey is following this, that all people on Medicaid, over 2 million people in the state of New Jersey, needed to go through a renewal between April 1st of 2023 and March 31st of 2024. And that for the first time since the public health emergency began, this could result in a termination. One other point before we go on to the next slide is that for most people, that renewal is happening on the anniversary month of when it always happened. So if you know that you're a person who always was renewed in the month of February, then your renewal should be coming up starting tomorrow, February. And even though we're more than halfway through this year, I am not 100% sure we are more than halfway through the renewals. I think there's been a backlog, and so I think that many are still being processed, and there are more to come, and so this remains timely. Next slide. So I jokingly advertised this, not jokingly, but I, was going to do 5 lessons learned. And the truth of the matter is there are hundreds and hundreds of lessons that have been learned in the last 6+ months. And I'm kind of shoving them all into 5. But you'll see there is some overlap in some of them about the way they play out the problems for people. So the first one, though, I'm going to start right at the beginning, right at the hard hitting. What do I do if I received a letter terminating my Medicaid? Next slide. So the very first piece of advice here is really simple and yet so critically important. It's to read the letter, paying close attention to the details. And I'm going to walk through that with you over the next few slides and why those details matter. And then we always say at Disability Rights New Jersey to save your envelope. And the reason we want you to save your envelope is because Medicaid is an entitlement. It's a constitutionally protected property right. And so the letters that you get are actually legal notices, and they have to comply with a significant body of federal law. And if they don't, they're constitutionally inadequate, and we as lawyers do things with that. And time matters. And so sometimes the envelope is the way we show that people didn't get what the letter may have one date on it, but when somebody got it is very different because the postmark on the envelope shows that those 2 dates don't align. And so it's important always to keep the envelope. Next slide. So the first thing you want to look at is who is the letter from. Most of these letters say New Jersey Family Care across the top in colorful print if it's in color stationery. New Jersey Family Care is a brand name the state of New Jersey gives to its Medicaid program and its CHIP program, Children's Health Insurance Program. And that brand name is a brand name like Band-Aid is a brand name for an adhesive bandage. So it stands for the whole program, and it has other meaning as well. So sometimes when a letter comes from New Jersey Family Care, it's telling you it's coming from the state vendor, as opposed to the next bullet, which is the county welfare agencies. Sometimes New Jersey Family Care also refers to a particular kind of Medicaid, which I will talk about in a second. So again, sometimes it's coming from the state vendor. It will say New Jersey Family Care on the top, and it won't reference a county welfare agency anywhere else. Sometimes the letter is coming from the county welfare agency. And in the olden days, they used their own letterhead, and some counties are still doing that. But they also have a new letterhead for these renewals and terminations where it will say New Jersey Family Care across the top, but along the bottom, in the bottom margin, it will have the name and the address of the county welfare agency. So you can see where that's really coming from. So why does this matter? Well, the first thing is it may give you information about the Medicaid program you were on when the public health emergency began. For example, if it's the state vendor, it's just New Jersey Family Care, there's nothing about a county welfare agency anywhere on the letter, that may be a hint that you were on a Medicaid program that we call Affordable Care Act Medicaid, or Expansion Medicaid, or Obamacare Medicaid, or MAGI Medicaid, which stands for Modified Adjusted Gross Income. It's an IRS phrase. Or they may call it New Jersey Family Care, because that's another way they use that word to talk about this specific program. And that's helpful information for you to understand which Medicaid program you're on. And if you go and come to us at Disability Rights, or you go to any other lawyer, it's helpful for them to help untangle a situation. If it's the county welfare agency, it might be helpful because it might give you a name or a telephone number or some kind of contact information that as we proceed through the slides and see how many problems are out there, you'll understand is a helpful thing to have. Next slide, please. The next thing to focus on in your letter is what is the letter telling you is going to happen. The legal term for this is what is the action or the adverse action that the state Medicaid agency or its agent, like the county welfare agency, is taking. And so sometimes the word in the letter will say termination, sometimes it will say denial, sometimes it will say ineligible. I'm here to tell you it doesn't matter what of those words it uses, because legally they are all terminations. None of them are denials in this renewal process. They are all terminations, and that has legal significance because of those constitutional protections I talked about. And I'm going to talk about those a little bit more in the coming slides. The important thing to notice also is the effective date of the termination. So what day are your benefits going to stop according to the notice? And that's important for a lot of reasons, right? Because you need to know when you're going to lose your Medicaid, but also because that notice has to be sent at least 10 days before the date of the termination. For the most part, we're seeing 10 days in the notices, but every now and then it's less than 10 days. Keep that envelope, because the date of the notice may say one thing, but the date it went in the mail may be another thing, especially if you get it like the day before the termination or after the termination date, it shows up in the mail. And in at least one case, the date of the notice was 3 weeks after the date of the termination, which is completely unconstitutional. So again, these things really matter. Next slide. It's also important to focus on the reason for the Medicaid termination. Sometimes that's called the explanation of eligibility determination. And there are kind of two flavors I'm going to talk about. The first is if your letter has this language in it that's in blue. Individuals are no longer eligible because they failed to provide requested information in a timely manner, and then they have a citation. So what does this mean? It means that the person who's getting the notice did not return what's called the request for information, or the RFI, the renewal packet that they got. And maybe they didn't return it because they didn't receive it. It's hard to return something you never got. We're going to talk a little bit about that more. Maybe it's because the person got a follow-up letter asking for additional information and they didn't return additional information. Maybe they didn't give additional information because it wasn't really clear what was being asked for. Sometimes it is clear and sometimes it's not. I'll give an example. You send in all the information that was originally requested, including you have 2 life insurance policies, and you send the information about those life insurance policies, the face value, the cash value of the policy. That's what they really want to know. And then you get letters saying you have to send us your life insurance policies, and you think to yourself, well, I've already sent them, so I don't need to send them again. That is a real life scenario. And what it was the county thought there was additional life insurance policies, but they didn't specify it in the letter. And it was like a miscommunication because the person was like, I already gave them. When they finally got clarity, the county thought that there was a policy that didn't actually exist. And as soon as they cleared that up, the termination went away. So, because it was a termination based on failure to return information. And the other thing is that the person has returned everything that's been requested. Maybe they've done that 3 times, twice by mail and once in person, and something has gone wrong. That information, I say in jest, but probably true. Someday somebody will find all of these in the basement of the county welfare office, sitting there in a pile. So you can go to the next slide. That was fine. Thanks, Jesse. So what do you do if your notice has this reason in it, no longer eligible because they failed to provide requested information? One of the most important things I can say is do not file a new application. The county welfare agency may tell you to file a new application, and you're going to stand firm and say no. You are going to complete and return the renewal application, which may look exactly the same, but says renewal on the top, isn't a new application. The information may be nearly identical, but that doesn't matter. It is a renewal. If something's missing, ask what it is, provide it. But you do not want to file a new application because new applications have been leading to denials as opposed to terminations. And that is a problem when it comes to getting continuation of benefits, which we'll talk about in a couple of slides. And you do want to request a fair hearing and continuation of benefits. All of these slides have at the end of them and call Disability Rights New Jersey. And that is at the end of this presentation, and call Disability Rights New Jersey. But don't wait to talk to us to file your fair hearing and continuation of benefits. Just do it. If everything resolves, you can always withdraw it. But if you don't file it, sometimes it's a problem. There's language in these letters that also talk about if we get your information within 90 days and you're eligible, we'll reinstate you back to the day you were terminated. And we've had some clients who have relied on that language so that they have not filed a fair hearing. And then they come to us when it's too late. So please, 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 their 90-day language promising to turn it all back on if everything works out at the end of the day is great. We appreciate it. It's the law. They have to do it under federal law. But in the meantime, request your fair hearing and continuation of benefits. Next slide. So the second flavor is that your reason for your Medicaid termination, you returned all the documents, they have them, but they found you no longer eligible for some reason. You're over income, you're over resourced, maybe you're not clinically eligible anymore for a program like Managed Long-Term Services and Supports. First, you're not disabled, there's no disability determination, some reason you're not eligible. The most important thing to know is don't panic, because there is a federal law that says prior to making a determination of ineligibility, the Medicaid agency must consider all bases of eligibility. And so what does that mean? It means that you may well be eligible through a different program. And we are finding that the county welfare agencies in particular are not screening for all bases of eligibility. They're only doing some. So for example, they're finding that somebody is not eligible under an age blind and disabled Medicaid program like NJ Care, which is different than New Jersey Family Care. It can be a little more confusing. I didn't make the rules. And New Jersey Care has income up to 100% of poverty, which in 2023 was $1,215. I don't have the 2024 number memorized. Well, maybe that person could be eligible through that MAGI program I talked about earlier, which goes up to 138% of poverty. And maybe nobody screened the person under that program. So don't despair when you get the termination notice. You know, many of them that we've done, nearly all of them, we've gotten the person ultimately eligible. Next slide. When I mentioned there are other Medicaid programs, this slide is just an example of these programs. And I'm not going to go through the eligibility criteria for these different programs. They're all different. They have different income levels, different resource levels, no resource levels like MAGI or workability. So that is really a conversation with an attorney if you're in this situation. And again, we're going to have a webinar posted by the end of February that goes through all of this. We have one now, as I said, a couple years old. Next slide. The notice also has to include an explanation of how they reached your income or your resources to determine you weren't eligible or clinically. And it has to include calculations. And so one of the piece of advice giving now is that when you open that envelope, immediately count the number of pages in there It's probably not a bad idea to take a pencil and at the bottom write 1 of 5, 2 of 5, 3 of 5, 4 of 5, 5 of 5, if there are 5 pages. And the reason for that is we are getting people who say that these are the only 2 pages that were in the envelope. I did not get the count of the calculations. I did not get an explanation. I did not get my fair hearing rights, which is the next slide. And that's important because that's a constitutional violation, and it helps solve the problem. So that also is something you want to pay attention to and actually note when you get your termination letter in the mail. Next slide, please. The last thing that I'm going to talk about in the letter is that the letter has to include a notice of your fair hearing right. And again, some people are saying that they aren't getting this page, and this is really problematic. The page is sort of a standard page. It's a template page, and it says your right to a fair hearing, and then you can fill in the boxes. One of the things that we have seen, we've seen a couple problems with that template, though. The first is one of the post-COVID more generous procedures is that you have 60 days to request the fair hearing instead of typically 20. Some of the notices still say 20, but you have 60 days to request the fair hearing. You don't want to wait because your Medicaid will stop. It will get turned back on, but you may, if you wait 45 days, you might have to pay for a prescription drug out of pocket and then hope you're going to get reimbursed later on. So it's really best to request the fair hearing as soon as you get the notice. Continuation of benefits are automatic right now. That means that while your fair hearing is pending, your Medicaid stays in place, you don't lose any services. I have the but ... there because in the beginning, it was taking a long time to get the continuation of benefits turned on. So people would request the fair hearing, sometimes before the termination date, sometimes right after the termination date, and yet their benefits were not turned back on. I think there was a real backlog in the state. I think that's better now, but just be aware. And there are things you can do if the benefits are not turned back on quickly, including calling Disability Rights New Jersey. So you have 60 days, but you should do it right away, and the continuation of benefits are automatic. Now, one of the things we're seeing is some counties are not using the form of notice they should be using. And so instead of it saying the continuation of benefits is automatic, whatever that language is, it has checkoff boxes. Yes, I want continuation of benefits. No, I don't. So in that case, you should check, yes, I do. You are at no risk having to repay benefits because there's no recoupment of wrongly paid benefits during the public health emergency because of that moratorium. So you don't have to worry about that right now. So definitely get the continuation of benefits. Next slide, please. And here is the address and the fax number. If you're going to mail it, which I would not recommend, make sure you send certified mail, return receipt requested. Preference is to fax it and to save the fax receipt. That's faster and a more clear receipt. Next, oh, by the way, I'm going to talk about requesting a fair hearing throughout the rest of the presentation. This is the only slide where the information about how to do that is. And I do believe that our slides will be on the website along with the recording. Next slide, please. So our second lesson, fill in the blank. Someone told me my Medicaid is terminated, but I never got anything in the mail. We're hearing this from a lot of people. Next slide. So what does this problem typically look like? Well, we've had clients who go to the pharmacy to refill a prescription, and the pharmacist looks in the system and says, nope, it's February the 2nd and your Medicaid terminated on January 31st. Another thing we're hearing is that a provider agency, for example, a home health agency responsible for somebody's personal care assistant services, will call and tell you, just letting you know, in the system, it's showing your Medicaid is going to terminate next week. I have a little asterisk here because I want to make sure that everybody is focused that right now I'm talking about your Medicaid benefits terminating, not a particular service. The reduction or termination of personal care assistance services could go on throughout the public health emergency. There was no moratorium on that. That comes from the managed care organization, not from the county welfare agency or the state vendor. That's not what we're talking about today. So this is where your PCA provider calls and says, your aid won't be coming anymore starting of February 1st. And another way people are hearing is through their managed care organization, their care or their case manager, or I heard on the earlier webinar today, somebody got a letter from their MCO saying you were terminated, but they never got a letter from the state. Next slide. So what can you do? Well, the first thing you can do is you can call what's called the Medical Assistance Customer Center, or the MAC, and there's a slide at the end with the telephone numbers, depending on what county you're in. Or you can call your county welfare agency if you know their number or know your caseworker from the past experience. But if you call the MAC, you can just say to them, I was told my Medicaid was terminated. Can you tell me more? What are you seeing in this system? And they usually can tell you, yes, we can see a termination date of January 31st, maybe a termination date of March 31st. They can at least confirm for you that your Medicaid was terminated according to the state system. You can email the Medicaid agency. So this is the email address, the dmahs.referrals@dhs.nj.gov. But the better course of action is to go to that link, and that link includes an online form to complete with what the problem is. And you would say, my Medicaid was terminated and I never got any notice. I never got a renewal packet. I never got a notice saying my benefits were terminating. I had no idea. This came out of left field. You also want to request a fair hearing and continuation of benefits to that fax number or address in a previous slide. And you want to just write a letter. You want to say, this is what I was told at the pharmacy. I called the MAC in Passaic County and confirmed, and I was told that my Medicaid terminated as of this date, and I am requesting a fair hearing and continuation of benefits. As long as it's within 60 days, you should be okay. Next slide. It's actually 60 days of the date of the notice, not the date of the termination, but you don't have a notice. So just use the date of the termination as sort of a, benchmark for the 60 days. Our third lesson, you mailed back your request for information. That's the renewal packet, but I never heard anything. Next slide. So what does this problem look like? You returned the request for information. Again, that's the renewal packet. On the top, it says renewal application, and it asks for this information. And you just haven't heard anything back from the county welfare agency or from New Jersey Family Care, AKA the state vendor, and a long time has passed, by which I mean more than a month. I think that in the fall, there definitely has seemed to have been some catch up right before the Christmas break and subsequently in January, but there was a while there as we were moving into late December where people hadn't heard anything back in 2 months plus. And that makes people anxious, understandably. The other thing that may have happened is that you might have mailed back your original renewal, but then you got a letter asking for more information and you've sent that back. And sometimes that request is on a very short deadline for the additional information. So I just want to kind of segue for a second and say something about that. If you get such a thing, sometimes it's called a 10-day letter. and you can't get together whatever is in there within that time frame, you can always ask them for more time. They're not going to give you a lot more time, but they should give you at least another week. The other thing that we've heard from clients is when they've gotten that 10-day letter and they've called about it, they're told if they don't get that information in by that deadline, that they will be terminated from Medicaid. And depending on how that's said, it can be misleading. It leads people to think that they're going to be terminated on that day. And the answer to that is no. They still need to send out a termination notice with fair hearing rights, with a right to ask for continuation of benefits. So don't panic if they say that. I think what they're saying is if you don't return it by that deadline, we're going to send out the letter. But it can sometimes sound like you're actually being terminated on that day. Next slide. So what can you do if you sent everything back in? Maybe you hand delivered it. Maybe you've done it. We've had people mail it twice and hand deliver it once. You know, they just can't figure out where it goes. But you did all that and you haven't heard anything back. What can you do to make sure it didn't get lost again, or that you haven't been terminated and you didn't know it, so on and so forth? Well, you can certainly call the county welfare agency. Hopefully by that point, you do have a name and a telephone number. That is hit or miss. Some people are getting, you know, quick, cogent responses from their caseworker and an update on the status. Some people, you know, send emails and leave 12 messages and they don't hear anything back. You can email the Medicaid agency in the information I gave in the previous slide, or go fill out a form online to explain what the problem is. Probably the fastest thing to do is to call the MAC, the Medical Assistance Customer Center, and just double check that you're still on Medicaid. They're not really going to be able to tell you anything about where in the process your request for, you know, your renewal application is, how far along, where you are in the queue, so to speak. But they will be able to see if there's a termination date in the system, and you want to know that if you haven't heard back. Next slide, please. Our next situation is one where I would say nearly half the cases we've seen have been this, that the person has lost their SSI. And, you know, are they still eligible for Medicaid? Next slide. So what does this problem look like? The person was on SSI in March of 2020. And so since they were on SSI, they had SSI related Medicaid. In New Jersey chooses to do this. States have this choice, and not every state does it, but New Jersey does it, and it's very helpful. Your SSI application is your Medicaid application. You don't have to file a separate Medicaid application with the county. And so once you're found eligible by the Social Security Administration, you're also eligible for Medicaid because the criteria are exactly the same. And you don't have to do anything more. But that doesn't mean that the Social Security Administration is the Medicaid agency. They're just an eligibility determination agency for the purposes of Medicaid, like the county welfare agency is. And so when you stop getting SSI cash assistance, so in this example, the person stops getting SSI cash assistance during the public health emergency, they have to have their Medicaid moved from the Social Security Administration to the state of New Jersey. And so, if you're in this situation, you will get a letter from New Jersey Medicaid, and I'm going to have a screenshot of it next, saying that you're at risk of losing Medicaid because you were terminated from SSI. Next screen. This is the sample notice. It says here it comes from the Department of Human Services, Division of Medical Assistance and Health Services. That's the Medicaid agency. And most of the letters we've seen say that, but not all. Some of them have had the Division of Developmental Disabilities on the top. Some of them have had county Medicaid, county welfare agencies. So it has not been uniform. The next thing is it says important notice about your Medicaid. That's what it should say. But some of them say Medicaid termination notice. That is blatantly wrong. This is not a termination notice. This is simply a notice saying, hey, be on the lookout. We're going to send you a blue envelope, which is a request for information. So keep an eye out and return it when you get it. But sometimes the language has been changed from this template letter to be much more threatening. So just be aware of that. Next slide. And that's the first point here. The title of the letter or the text in the body suggests it's a Medicaid termination. The next thing that's been problematic with these cases is that the Medicaid agency was putting a termination date in the system when they sent out this letter with the blue envelope 4 months out. So for example, if the notice was dated September, they were putting a December 31st termination date in the system. And then the other problem was that some people got the first letter, but never got the blue envelope, which is the renewal, the request for information. Next slide. So here's kind of the answer to each of those. The most important thing to know is that first letter that says you're going to get a blue envelope. This is not a termination notice. It's just a letter trying to alert you that you're going to get a blue envelope. You should pay attention when you get it. The second thing about the Medicaid agency putting the termination date in the system 4 months out, thank goodness they are not doing that anymore as of about December. We had talked to them about it all throughout the summer and the autumn and told them this was unconstitutional. Whether they agreed with that or not, they have decided to not do it anymore because they had no quality control to make sure that a person wasn't inadvertently terminated. However, you may have a date in the system already if your SSI termination process started before like mid-December. So if you want to find out if you have a termination date in the system, you can call the Medical Assistance Customer Center. I want to be clear, it is a fake termination date. It is not real. It's unconstitutional. So if that happens, another situation to call Disability Rights New Jersey. And for people who never got the blue envelope, you can call the MAC or your county welfare agency. You can go down to your county welfare agency and get it, complete it, and return it. But remember what I said in an earlier slide, not a new application. You want the renewal application, not a new application. And if somebody refuses to give that to you and says, this is what you have to do, make sure when you return it, you take a red pen and write renewal, or take a blue pen and write renewal, and then highlight it in yellow marker, put stars around it, arrows pointing to the word renewal. So it is viewed as a renewal. Next slide. If your termination date is still in the system and that date is coming up quickly, remember what I just said, that letter is not a termination notice. You may or may not be eligible when you send back the renewal packet. And if you're not eligible, then you will get a termination notice and then you can go back to less than one. But until that happens, it's not a termination. And yet you may have a termination date in the system because the state was putting them in. I'll just editorialize again, unconstitutionally. So we have found that some people, despite many efforts, still have a date in the system. Their renewal hasn't been processed yet, even though they've given all their documents back because of the backlog, and that date is still in the system. And go back. Yeah, so that's the only time we recommend that you request a fair hearing and continuation of benefits. So if you're within 7 days and it's still, you call the MAC, it's still in the system, request a fair hearing and continuation of benefits. Better yet, call us much earlier than that, and we will intervene in the situation. Next slide. And our last lesson tonight, what if my child with a disability receives a termination notice? Next slide. The situation I'm talking about here is a very limited one. First of all, Most children go through that MAGI Medicaid, that also known as Affordable Care Act Medicaid or Expansion Medicaid, ACA. But the MAGI, Modified Adjusted Gross Income method of counting, up to 147% of the federal poverty level, because Medicaid is a program for low-income children. That kind of Medicaid doesn't require a disability, and that's where most children are. Disability Rights New Jersey doesn't handle those cases, but we can talk to people about referrals if they call us. I know Legal Services of New Jersey, maybe some of the regional legal services programs, Community Health Law Project. I'm not sure they take children without disabilities either. So there are other resources. So our focus as the protection and advocacy for the state of New Jersey are going to be people with disabilities generally and children with disabilities specifically here. And in particular, this is about children who are in higher income families. So children in lower income families, we're not really seeing a problem with them who have disabilities. They're being renewed, or at least we're not seeing a problem. What we're seeing is a certain kind of fact pattern. So these are children who were found eligible during the public health emergency under what are called COVID flexibilities. These children are typically not financially eligible absent those flexibilities. Those flexibilities allowed them to be looked at as households of one and no deeming of parental income. And the children do not qualify, or allegedly do not qualify, for managed long-term services and supports because they have care needs for personal care assistance, but not for skilled nursing or private duty nursing. So we're seeing that fact pattern come up a lot. And if you or you know somebody in that category, next slide. What can you do? The first thing we've been told by the state is that those children should apply for DD services through Perform Care if they haven't already done it. They're not doing it for the purpose of getting Perform Care services, though that may be helpful in somebody's life too. They're doing it because they need the eligibility determination that Perform Care does for DD services. And when you go to that website, you can choose behavioral services or IDD services. And we're trying to get clarity from the state on this. We're fairly certain they are talking about the eligibility screen through the DD services link, not the behavioral services link. And then they should apply for a fair hearing and continuation of benefits, just like everyone else. And these, if you're in this situation, please do call us. This is a complicated legal situation. It does not have an easy answer. And so we're working on it right now with several clients. And hopefully it will have a good resolution soon, but it doesn't have any, it's a litigate. We have to go into court, into the fair hearing on behalf of these children in order to solve the problem. It's not a self-advocacy solution. So next slide. I have some really broad-based helpful steps here. So that you can do this now if you haven't gone through renewal yet. The first is either to confirm or update your address if you've moved, and this is the number the state Medicaid agency gives. So some of those renewal packets may be going to the wrong address, so you might want to just make sure that they have your correct address. You can also let your managed care organization know your address, and they, I believe, can share it with the state agency. When you get the renewal packet, you really want to do it and complete it in a timely way. We've had some people say, oh, I just pushed it to the bottom of the pile and I didn't take it out until the day before it was due. That's not a wise idea right now because of the backlog. You really want to get it done as quickly as possible and returned. You want to keep a full copy. We weren't really saying that in the beginning, but so many seem to have gotten lost, and it's so onerous to put these things together that it's just probably worthwhile making a full copy of whatever you submit. And then hand deliver it and get a receipt if you hand deliver it. Somebody asked in the early session, what if they refuse? I guess if they refuse, then you can, sometimes they might have a mailbox that you put it in. You can take a picture of yourself and date stamp it, putting it in the mailbox. You can take a picture, handing it to the clerk that you're handing it to. I'm sure they won't like that, but you can do other things because you're gonna say, I want proof that I gave this to you today. If you mail it, certified mail, return receipt requested. If you have questions, if something is going wrong, if you don't know what's going on, if there's a delay, if you're not getting an answer, you can email the Medicaid agency. I already gave that information, or call the MAC. The MAC is best to ask questions about, do you see a termination in the system? When in doubt, request the fair hearing and continuation of benefits. You can always withdraw it. There's no downside to doing that. And then call Disability Rights New Jersey. There's a slide in a second that has our information. We provide free legal representation to people with disabilities in our areas identified through our, we seek public input. The board votes on our, what are called our goals and objectives. They're on our website, and this year Medicaid terminations is one of the things that we are focused on. Here are those MAC numbers that I talked about earlier. Next slide. And here is our contact information. And again, this will be on our website. The slides where you can find all this information and download the slides if that's helpful. We do have 10 minutes left. I don't see any questions in the chat, Jesse, which is why I didn't stop and ask you along the way. I didn't see anything going in. Am I missing anything?
No, there are none.
Okay, so why don't you stop showing the presentation? So we're a small, intimate group, and we have a few minutes. And if people have questions, they can just take themselves off of mute and ask.
Quick question,
I
would you
would
like
ask.
to stop recording first or no?
No, you can keep recording, but I am going to say to people, please keep your comments general. Don't be specific to your situation. But before I do that, I'm going to put someone on the spot because I didn't know she was here. I wasn't sure. I see that Chris Burns from Legal Services is here. Chris, do you mind coming on to camera, or at least off of mute, and telling folks what kind of cases, anything you want to say about cases that can come, intakes that can come to Legal Services around Medicaid terminations?
Hey, thanks, Glenn. I don't have a way to start. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so thanks for the quick shout out. I think Gwen really covered anything that I would have about the Medicaid terminations. So I work for Legal Services of New Jersey. We are focused much more broadly on terminations across the low income population. And so, you know, if it's not a disability issue that you have, or you know somebody who has an issue that does not perhaps involve a disabled person, we're happy to handle those kind of cases. And we're doing it on the MAGI population, the age-bunded disabled population, just across the board. But I think Gwen did an absolutely fantastic job of covering everything that we're seeing as well, and troubleshooting in the same way that we are advising our clients to do.
Great. So Chris, maybe you could just drop the 800 number for LSNJ in the chat.
Yeah, I'll do that. So everybody knows we have a statewide hotline. We cover every state in the, every county in the state through our hotline. And you can call that general number, which I'll put in the chat if you need help. And I also want to just say, like DR&J, our services are free. And at LS&J, we do not have any immigration restrictions. So if that's something that you're worried about, I can assure you that we can help anybody, no matter what your status is.
Great, thanks, Chris. I did get a question in the box, and we got this same question this morning, so I get it. What if you've never received any letter of any kind at this point? Well, it may be that your renewal hasn't happened yet, right? Because these renewals will continue through March 31st or is it March 30th? I'm having 30 days have September, April, May. I can't remember right now. But you may not really get anything back, a termination letter, until later than that date, right? So it will be ongoing into the early spring. So I would say if you have no idea, you should call the MAC and make sure there's not a termination in the system, right? And then you may want to try and refresh your memory when you typically get the renewal. And if you have any, if you have any name or at your county board of social services, you can call them and see what your month of renewal is. There's still people who are going to be February and March. And as I said, I think the March is going to continue into the early spring after that. So you may not have gotten anything yet, but you just want to make sure that you haven't been terminated. Are there any other questions? If somebody wants to take themselves, off of mute, feel free to ask. Okay, so this is a good question. It came to me directly, but it's about people who were on SSI at the beginning of the public health emergency, but at some point they moved on to SSDI. Some of those people moved on because they're receiving what's called a derivative benefit from their parents. Maybe their parent retired, their parent became disabled, or their parent sadly passed away during the public health emergency. Social Security has a name. I'm just going to say the name. I don't like the name, but I didn't make the name up. Calls those individuals disabled adult children. And there are special Medicaid protections that they get to move from SSI to what's called a DAC status for disabled adult child. But that DAC status isn't handled by Social Security. It's handled by the county welfare agency. There are a lot of mistakes in those cases we've found. And so sometimes they're not looking at the person as to whether or not they're a DAC because their income might be too high for New Jersey Care, the program I mentioned that goes up to 100% of poverty. But because they're a DAC, it doesn't matter. They're still eligible as long as they're still otherwise eligible for SSI, meaning their resources are below 2,000. They're still a disabled person. Other income doesn't exceed what the SSI limits would be. And so those are not going smoothly, frankly. That should have the SSI letter first with the blue envelope with the request for information, which should be returned. We are seeing counties write back in those cases, and they're asking for a lot of information if the person lives with their parent about in-kind support. And if you're in that situation, those are a little bit complicated and a little bit tricky. So please call us. If somebody is receiving in that situation and is receiving DDD services, there really should be no issue. But there is, because even if they're not a DAC, they should be able to come in under the DD supports waiver, but that hasn't happened uniformly. So I would just say, please, please get in touch with us on that. And if you've received a notice for termination in that situation, definitely request fair hearing and continuation of benefits within 60 days and get in touch with us as soon as possible. And in terms of, I think I answered that question. So when in doubt, request the fair hearing, can never hurt, can always withdraw it. And if you've returned I want to say one other thing. If you got one of those notices that says you haven't returned the information, please request the fair hearing and continuation of benefits even after you return the information, even if you already did. Just in case, it's an issue that's unfolding in real time right now, with people who are then being found ineligible. And beyond the scope of explanation here, it gets into lawyer jargon. But the really important thing is if you have that fair hearing from that first termination notice, then you will have continuation of benefits. And you know, you're covered while we lawyers try and figure it out. And again, if you didn't get a fair hearing form, we're hearing that a lot, that it is not in the information that people got, the termination notice that people got. You can just write a letter and send it in fax. If the fair hearing unit's going to tell you, you know, that's okay, because then you're going to call us. But we're going to have preserved that date for the fair hearing and the continuation of benefits. So, we got one more minute. Do we have any other questions? Mercedes, I see that you're here too. Do you want to, any parting comments from you? And thank you again to the council for supporting us in this work.
No, just terrific job. Happy to listen in tonight. And there was a lot more questions earlier today, but it was a larger group. So if you are here tonight and you have more interest in the subject, I would say listen to the earlier recording as well. You might pick up some other things based on the questions, but great job. Thanks so much, everybody at Disability Rights. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're so welcome. So, okay, we are at 8 o'clock. And so I'm sure everybody either wants to eat a late dinner because they never ate, or maybe their favorite TV show is on, or maybe they just need to put on their jammies and get in bed because it's a cold winter night. But thank you all for being here, and be on the lookout for this coming up on our website. Thank you so much. And Jesse, you can stop the recording.